When you picture Roman Britain, what comes to mind? Probably orderly legions, perfectly straight roads, maybe Hadrian's Wall. But beneath that very neat and tidy image of civilization, there's a whole other world, one that was far more brutal, far more spectacular than you might imagine. And it's a world we're only just now, really, beginning to uncover. See, when the Romans showed up, they didn't just bring their armies and their engineers. Oh no. They brought their absolutely insatiable appetite for entertainment. And I mean, they brought it everywhere. We're not talking about one or two little oddities here. We've found at least 16 of these massive venues. And just look at this map. They weren't all clustered down south. These arenas were built all the way from the coasts right up to the northern frontier. And the amazing thing is, this isn't some old story that's locked away in a dusty book. It is literally still being dug out of the ground right now as we speak. Just take a look at the recent digs at Birmingham Fort up in Northumberland. I mean, archaeologists just pulled out this incredible treasure trove of artifacts. You've got the obvious military gear, right? Spearheads, lead shot. But then you get imported Spanish pottery that once held olive oil, and these beautiful personal items like dolphin-style brooches and engraved gems. This is how we piece together the real human story of these places. So we know these massive arenas were dotted all over Britain, but what did they actually look like? What was the blueprint for one of these frontier colosseums? Let's break it down. Okay, so the heart of the whole thing was the cavea. That's just the Latin word for the tiered seating that wrapped all the way around the main stage. The entire design was all about one thing, giving thousands of people a perfect view of the action. But here's the really crucial thing. You've got to completely erase that image of the giant stone colosseum in Rome from your mind. That's not what we're talking about here. Most of the British amphitheatres were what we call Type 1. Basically, they were built by digging out the middle and piling all that dirt into massive banks around the edge. Then they just fit those banks with simple timber or stone seats. It was a much more practical, frontier style of building. And every single one of them had a few key features in common. You had the arena floor itself, which was covered in sand. And yeah, the grim reason for that was to soak up all the blood. To keep the crowd safe, you'd have a high wall called a balteus. Then there were the main gates, the Portae Pompeiae, for all the grand entrances. And hidden away, you had the cursories, those dark holding pens where animals and the fighters themselves would wait for their turn. Now, not all these arenas were created equal. Not by a long shot. Depending on where they were built, in a military fort, a big city, or out in the countryside, they served very different purposes. You can really group them into three main flavors. First, you've got your military ones, at forts like Chester, which were basically for troop training and, keeping the soldiers from getting bored. Then you have the urban ones, in big towns like London, which were all about putting on huge public shows. And finally, you get these rural ones, often near religious shrines like Frilford, that were more for local festivals and community get-togethers. All right, so we've got the stage, we've got the audience, but what about the show itself? What was actually happening inside these arenas? And this is where you see the fascinating Roman attitude towards all this violence. On the left, you have the raw reality, a gritty bronze statuette of a gladiator found in London, armed and ready to kill or be killed. But on the right, in a beautiful mosaic from a rich person's villa, you see the whole bloody sport romanticized, with little cupids play fighting as gladiators. It was both a brutal, deadly reality and a celebrated art form. The games themselves, the munera, were a pretty violent mix. Of course, you had the classic gladiatorial combat, pitting different styles of fighters against each other, like the famous Retiarius with his net and trident. Then there were the Veneziones, which were animal hunts, where hunters would face off against local beasts like bears, wolves, and bulls. And of course, the arena was also a terrifying place for public executions. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about bloodlust and entertainment. For the Romans, these games were deeply, deeply tied to ritual, to death, and to their gods. Just listen to this. This is a real curse, scratched onto a tiny lead tablet that was found in the Caerleon amphitheater. It's a personal, desperate prayer to Nemesis, the goddess of revenge. Somebody was begging her to make sure their opponent did not leave that arena alive. It is just a chilling reminder of the incredibly high stakes for every single person who stepped onto that sand. So, if these places were so central to Roman life in Britain, why did they all eventually fall silent? What happened? And we have to remember just how central they were. The amphitheater at Chester could hold 7,000 people. That is enough room for the entire Legion station there, plus thousands of civilians from all around. I mean, these were the super stadiums of their day, the absolute heart of the community. And their story, their rise and fall, it pretty much mirrors the story of Roman Britain itself. The first ones are built in the 1st century. Then, the 2nd century is this golden age, a peak in popularity, when old arenas get upgraded to stone. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries, as the empire's fortunes start to fade, well, so do the games. The arenas are abandoned, and their stones are often just stolen to build town walls. So these giant earthworks you can still see today. They're like ghosts of a forgotten popular culture. One that makes sport, religion, and state-sponsored violence all into one big show. The games may have ended 1,600 years ago, but our own hunger for spectacle, that hasn't gone anywhere. Which really makes you wonder, have we actually changed all that much?